This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Patt and Stephen Chung.
You are watching or listening to the Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. I'm Steve, that's Doug. Good morning, Doug.
Morning, Steve, and good to see you, buddy. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays, Happy New Year.
Yes, sir.
Now, in the Northeast, Doug, it's been insanely cold today.
Oh, my God.
Minus 8 degrees, which, you know, that's cold. That's really cold.
It's cold.
And it's been cold for a while. So it's been hard to keep my house warm. And I want to kind of talk about that. I mean, well, there's designing a new home. How do you keep that? How do you design that house so it can be warm? But also, I think your home is an older home, right? And
that's correct.
Yep. Working on that. My home is new, but the foundation is old, meaning I found the site, I knocked the existing house off, and I built on top of the foundation. So it's sort of in between.
That's cool.
And while that was great, it also has some issues, so we can talk about that.
Wow.
But before we do, Doug, because this was our first Christmas, and I'm kind of curious about what kind of gifts that an architect gives or receives. Wonder if you got anything interesting this year for your Christmas gifts.
Yeah, you know, I got a beer making kit, and this was not something that I'd ever considered or knew that could come in a box. But this thing came in a box with like a 2.5-gallon jar of sorts or jug of sorts, and plastic, and some hops, and I made beer. So on Christmas Day, I put that whole thing together. It took about 45 minutes, and it's now sitting in the closet and fermenting, and that'll go on for about 3 weeks, and then after that, I bottle it. So the person that purchased it for me actually got me all these bottles, and so I'm gonna bottle that on the 15th, and then I have 2 weeks to wait until it's drinkable. So we'll see. It's an IPA, and I'm a big beer fan, and it was a really kind of a fun gift to put the whole thing together. So how about you? What'd you get? Anything cool?
You know, it's very funny because we've sort of talked about this, and you know, you get different things. You get a sweater, you know, this kind of stuff, and you know, I say that's fine, but the gift that my son got it for me, and I really like it. It's the same kind of gift in a way as yours. Not that it's a beer making kit. It's actually a baseball development project or program, I would say.
Yeah.
And you know, it's very technical, and it has this sort of workout and you know how to do certain exercises, and then it comes with these things like, you know, these are bands for maintaining arm health. There's wrist weights you put on your arm to sort of strengthen certain parts of your body, your arm. There is this trampoline for using at home, and really the idea is you take these balls, which are all these different weights. These are all different weights.
Yeah. And
you throw them in different ways and strengthening different parts of your arm. And really all this has to do with preparation for pitching. And so it's really the wintertime, and now it's like we're thinking of the summer or late spring. How do you get ready? This is a program, step-by-step program for young kids, basically younger people, called Youth Edition. And it's really this kind of commitment for my kids to say, hey, let's try to get better. Let's try to, you know, improve over the next 3-4 months and really follow this program, which is awesome. I think it's really kind of cool. So it's sort of like your project in the sense that your beer project in the sense that there's a time commitment, there's a process, there's making this thing, and then there's sort of a payoff, I suppose, you know, 3-4, for you it's a couple weeks, but I just love this idea that there was this kind of program that someone has thought through, whether it's designing, you know, this program for young kids to throw a baseball, or it's making a beer, or it's something. There's something interesting about that, and I find that is something that a lot of architects have in common. People have asked me about it, and I can never really say, oh, we're all like this, we're all like that. But there is something about designing something, building something, it taking some time, and that be something that's realized later on. And you know, again, it's not unique to architects, but I think that's something that I find that a lot of architects that I know we share in common. So what do you think about that idea?
I totally agree. There's a process, right? There's a series of steps, and it gets you to this kind of payoff point. So good architects know those steps. They know that process. And I mean, that's why it's important to hire somebody that's been through that process before, because they're going to help you with all the road bumps that you're going to inevitably come across in the process of designing and building a home. So we spend our lives doing that.
There was someone who reached out to me, and they wanted to build a small pool house, and they didn't understand this. They thought, oh, can you just drop something and send me, me plans? And they didn't really understand that there was a process. It's not that I'm slow or something like that. It's more like I need to understand what it is that you're looking for. What are the parameters? As we sort of go through this process, it's going to take a little bit of time. We're going to develop different options. We're going to sort of uncover what's important to you. Everyone always says, oh, it's only this. It's like, but actually, there's more there. And as you sort of get to ask more questions, you really sort of find out and tease out more sort of concerns or interests or whatever it takes. It is a process, and it takes time. And ultimately, I find that when I work with someone, it's always takes a little bit of time, more time, and it's not because we're slow again, it's just because they realize that there's a lot involved, and we want to do this right. And I think that this is what we enjoy, this process. And sometimes I wish it would go faster, but it always takes time. And it's better that it takes the time. It gives you more time to think about it, consider alternatives, really go through all the different possibilities. And in the end, when it's done, everyone's really usually pretty happy with the result, because it's so much time and effort to put together this, whatever it is. So.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. I think your point about questions is the perfect issue. That is, you have to ask the right questions. And just by virtue of starting to ask questions when you're designing something, you're already making something better. So a pool house, where you say, well, how big is the pool in front of it? How far away is the pool? And what is the pool house for? And are people going to stay in the pool house? And is there a kitchen in the pool house? And how many changing rooms? And it goes on and on and on. So I can see how people come to the process and they say, gosh, well, it's just a pool house, design it. But if you say, look, step back and let me ask you 10 questions, right, and they'll give you 10 answers, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden they say, wow, now I understand what we're doing. We're designing something relative to our programmatic requirements. So it's all about questions, in my opinion.
Anyway, so okay, that's our little side route. But I'm always interested in, this year was getting a gift that I really thought it's much more exciting to me than something else, just because of this idea that this is going to be a 4 or 5 month long process, and it's going to be this weekly thing which we do, and it's measurable, and I find that all really interesting and exciting. So, all right, okay, let's get to the heart of the matter, which has to do with me being freezing in my home, and I don't know how you are in your home.
It's an old house, man. It's cold.
It's not cold.
Great.
Okay.
Tough to deal with.
Okay, so there's two parts to this, as I had mentioned. One is designing a new house, and of course that's in a way it's a lot easier than maybe trying to retrofit or warm up an older house. For example, talk about a new house. One of the first questions that comes up has to do with orientation. Sometimes we're able to site the house the way we want it. We can, orient it so that it doesn't have the north wind or the cold wind, or we can say that, oh, let's try to orient it so we get the best solar exposure, let's say south in our climate, and maybe minimize the west or the north, just because those are sort of the north is cold and the west is that sort of very harsh horizontal light. So these are things that we can think about. And then there are cases where you don't have these options. You're in a suburban sort of site and you have a backyard and you want it to fit, you want a beautiful big lot of windows, but that happens to be west and it's not ideal. So these are things that, nevertheless, these are the things that come up when you're designing a new home. For me, I want to talk about my existing home and things that I've been working on. I don't know what you're planning on, Doug, but why don't you begin with your first tip? And so just wanted to sort of intro that I'm going to talk about an existing homes for my 3 tips.
Well, I'm going to talk about both. So I became very well acquainted with fireplaces early in my career, I worked on lots of traditional or a number of traditional projects when I was a young intern architect. And so I ended up drawing lots and lots of fireplaces. And I came across the Rumford fireplace. So my first tip is to know your fireplaces. Contrary to popular understanding, there really are different shapes for a masonry firebox. We're not talking about a gas insert here. We're talking about a masonry firebox that is wood burning. So when we look at masonry fireboxes, they really come in two shapes. You got a modern firebox, you got a Rumford fireplace. From what I understand, the codes of recent, so let's say, I'm guessing here, but let's say the last 50 years or so, code compliance was a big part of building these fireboxes, and I believe one of the challenges with the Rumford is it's shallow, and code officials didn't like that because wood that's burning can fall out of a shallow firebox and become a hazard in a home. The Rumford fireplace was very, very popular in the mid 19th century, and it's really come back, I think, over the last 30, 40 years to become much more popular, and they work really well. So that's why I want to talk about them today. So a modern firebox is typically relatively deep. The back pitches towards you at the top, and it has sides which are not very shallow at all. They pitch back toward the back. The back is usually wider, and a modern firebox is usually squatter, so it's shorter and wider, where the Rumford fireplace or firebox is shallow. It has a straight back, so it goes straight up to the smoke shelf. It has a very shallow smoke shelf. That's the part you can't see once the smoke goes up and then up into the flue, and it has widely splayed sides, so the back is actually relatively small, but a Rumford fireplace is usually as tall as it is wide, so it's a big square. The reason fireboxes work so well is they reflect heat back into the room. So it's really not the fire as much as it is the fire heating up the masonry surfaces, which hold heat very, very well and then project the heat back into the room. That's why Rumford fireplaces work so well. So modern codes have been updated to include Rumford firebox dimensions, and we're seeing lots more Rumford fireplaces in homes today. So when you walk into an old home built in the 19th century before in the U.S. and you see a really shallow firebox, maybe it's only 12 or 18 inches in depth, and it's got these widely splayed sides, so it pitches and then it goes straight up. That's a Rumford fireplace. They almost look like they don't work, but they work really, really well, and I'll talk a little bit more about fireplaces in my next two tips. But Rumford fireplaces are really my favorite, and they're wonderful because they can be really large and they're very aesthetically pleasing, but they look kind of unusual. However, they function very, very well.
Okay, so hopefully you'll provide a link so someone can see what that looks like.
I will. So there's a great website all about Rumford fireplaces from Washington, and we'll show that link and show some images from that as well.
Let me ask you a question about fireplaces because I wonder about it. When the fireplace is not in use and let's say the doors are open, that means all the hot air in your house is going out the chimney, right? It's getting sort of sucked out.
No, actually, that's a good question. So you'll have a flue on the interior. And you can shut that. So it's called a damper. There's usually a metal damper. It's got and it opens and closes. When you start your fire, you're going to want to open that damper up to allow the smoke to exit. But the damper is typically closed and it's not drawing air through mostly because there's no fire in the fireplace. And I will talk about that a little bit.
Okay. All right, awesome. That's a great tip. I'm curious about that because I'm so cold. I can't just keep cranking up my heat. I've got to sort of find other ways to warm up the house. Okay, so this has come up for me in actually new projects and also in some retrofit or renovation project. It has to do with windows, and namely triple pane windows.
Sweet.
So I have in the past sort of dismissed this because it's always been the cost, and I think that I think people have been working on this, the manufacturers, and trying to get the cost down so it makes sort of sense. Meaning, if you have 3 layers of glass as opposed to 2, which is what most windows are, there's a cost increase. But now what I'm finding is that the energy improvement, let's say, is 20 to 30% for triple pane glass, and the cost is 15 to 40%. Meaning, depending upon the manufacturer, you're actually getting to the place where the efficiency you're paying for is sort of paying off. At least it's neutral. It's the same. And you think, okay, well, sort of, I'm not, it's more efficient. I'm paying more for it, but it's sort of working. And then what's the other benefit? Well, certainly there's the comfort. Just, when you stand next to glass, you can sort of feel that cold radiating off the glass. But it's also the sound. Triple insulated glass. The reason why we've used that in the past is because of sound. We built a townhouse project with a commuter line right behind it, and we use triple insulated glass, and it works fantastically well. It was not for energy efficiency, but I think there was that added benefit. So it's to me, I think, a consideration now going forward. And I think so. Triple pane glass means 3 pieces of glass, and in between each layer of glass is argon gas. It's a little bit of an airspace as well. And between those 3 layers, you are getting increased energy performance, sound, much better sound or noise reduction from outside. And what's so critical to remember is that the frame material, you can lose all of that savings if the frame material is something that's leaky or something like aluminum, which is very cold and a terrible conductor. If it's fiberglass or wood, typically fiberglass now these days, I'm finding to be a material that seems to be lightweight, strong, and able to sort of seal up leaks. So there's different manufacturers. I don't want to sort of call out any of them right now, but this is something that we've been looking into. For retrofitting a house, I would look into triple pane. You have to do a cost analysis and sort of figure out how important it is to you. But to me now, the energy performance improvements there, the reduction in costs are getting to the point where I'll definitely consider it for any future projects, including any retrofit projects. So triple insulated glass, triple pane glass, my first tip.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip. We're doing a project in Greenwich right now, and we're using triple glazing, and they've got double panes, everywhere. We're doing triple glazing, and I'm not kidding you. It's been, as you know, it's been freezing. We stand in front of these windows, and you cannot feel any of the cold, anything. You can't feel anything other than the interior temperature when you get up close to these windows. And they're stainless steel windows. So another thing that we do is you buy a window with solid thermal breaks, so there's no conductivity from the exterior material to the interior. So that's very important as well. If you are looking for metal on the inside or metal on the exterior. But triple pane glass, if you can afford, is the way to go. And you're right, it's becoming more affordable. Okay, so my second tip, know your chimney height. So that is to say that the taller the chimney, the better the draft. So when you light a fire in your fireplace, the reason the fire is burning is, of course, oxygen. It needs air for combustion. So what it's doing is it's pulling air from the interior of your house into that firebox, and then it runs up the flue. So this is really simple. I guess it's physics. Hot air rises faster than cold air, and if we think about a tube, which would be your clay flue liner, once you've got a fire in your firebox, you've got hot air, and that hot air wants to rise, so it goes up into the flue, and when you're constricting the space that smoke and heat get into, it moves even faster. So it's really just physics. The longer that tube is, the faster the air is pulled through. So the taller your chimney, the better the draw. It's called the drawer. The air that's entering your firebox gets pulled through there. The bigger the fire, and ultimately the more air that's being sucked out of your house. And I'll talk about that in the next tip. But there is a code. The International Residential Code says that your chimney has to be 2 feet taller than the closest roof 10 feet away, and the chimney, no matter what, has to be 3 feet taller than a location at a roof. But that's why when you look at houses and there's a chimney and it's not necessarily close to a roof, the chimney has to be at least 2 feet taller than the peak of that chimney or the location of relative to 10 feet away. But the taller the chimney, the better the draft, the better that fireplace is going to work.
Why do they make the chimney taller than the adjoining roofs or parapets?
Sparks.
Sparks.
Sparks, yeah. So you're definitely naturally, when you're burning something, depending on how tall that chimney is, you've got these burning embers, which are moving very, very quickly. And so they get hot and red, and then they exit. And if it doesn't have a top on it, they're going to move around up in the sky, and they're going to end up falling on the roof and burning the roof. So
it's better someone else's house and not your own.
Right. Hopefully you're close to somebody and you've got a metal roof if you've got a really short chimney.
My second tip has to do with sealing the gaps. And, that it seems obvious, but I thought was sort of neat is the neighbor across the street. I saw them doing this in the fall. They hired a company to come, hired some technicians, and basically conducted a blower door test.
Awesome.
That's where they have a big fan. They basically put it in the front door and sort of seal that fan off, and then they close off any openings like air conditioning units and the fans that go into the outside, the hoods, all of these. They close them all off, and then they blow this heavy fan through the house, and they're able to measure all the different air that's coming out of the house. They have these, again, all these great sort of tools, and they're able to really measure where air is leaking out of the house. And of course, it's the places you would expect, doors and windows and all of that. But there's a lot of areas that you wouldn't necessarily expect, which they can measure, and also kind of there's sort of a, level of what area is leaking the most and how then to sort of caulk those. I think that a lot of that, you don't necessarily need that blower test to sort of tell where it's leaking. I guess right now I've sort of done that myself. I've sort of sealed up where I thought air is coming out, but I'd be curious to see how effective I've been, and maybe I've sort of missed it, or I've sort of thought that, the door, around the door, that's where most of the air is coming out. In fact, maybe it's someplace else. So I'm not quite sure about that, but in any case, for me, it's really interesting because you think that, again, some of the key points, the main points are around windows, around doors. Those are obvious. Doors especially, because, those are often, they're opening and closing. They have a lot of functions to perform. It's not easy to make that seal a strong seal, but really one of the major points to look at is the space between foundation wall and then the wall that goes above that. So that's that sort of space, and say in the basement, and it's the sill. It's where you basically, for me, I have wood construction. So the wood construction goes on top of the concrete wall, and that seam, that space between concrete and wood is this is where you have so much leakage. And we had a company come recently and spray in this kind of foam insulation around that area. My basement now is incredibly warm. I can't believe how drafty it must have been. So and it was not an expensive thing. It was just really identifying that, okay, this is a place you can sort of feel with your hands. This is a place that air is just sort of pouring in. And once we sealed it, now we can go look for something else, or another place to sort of seal, because that was really the worst culprit. You can also another space for my house. I have an attached garage. It's the same thing. That space between the garage and the inside of the house, that wall, that space, that is also a culprit. So these are areas that maybe you wouldn't expect. I'm not sure, but again, look at doors and windows. But here's a place that we identified as being a major problem, and it comes up every time in these blower tests. I sort of looked at some of their what things that they find, and they always know that that's going to be a place where there's going to be major leakage, but they can measure it precisely. And for me, just sort of anecdotally, just or feeling it and knowing the difference that it's made, it's been a huge difference. So I would recommend looking at that space, the space between basement foundation wall and the sill, the wood sill where the walls of the house are going up. That's really a place you want to look at.
Holy cow, that's an amazing tip. I have as I said, I've got a really old house, and I've got a problem down there. I go down there and I can feel the air. So you're saying, who did you hire to come in and spray that for you?
That's although we had a company come do it. It's from Massachusetts, and they do it basically free of charge. I don't know why exactly they're trying to get us to save energy, but I think it's the energy company. They have an incentive to make sure we're all saving as much as we can. But basically, the company came around and they had a spray foam. It was very, you've seen it. You can buy it at Home Depot, any home goods store. And they spray this stuff all around. It's not beautiful looking, but it just sort of seals up all those gaps. That spray foam, when you spray it, it expands and it closes up all those gaps. And it's amazing how you don't feel any of that down there. It's become one of the warmer places in our house. So
that's so cool. I'm definitely going to recommend it. Boy, I'm glad you're my friend.
All right.
So, my
tip.
third tip. So, let's see here.
Tip.
Well, it's not really a tip, but the question I'm always asking myself when I have the fireplace going and we've got this wonderful fire and we're in the family room, we've got two fireplaces. So let's say we're in the family room, we've got a fire going. Why the heck is the rest of my house so cold? Right? Drives me crazy. Well, I didn't have to think about it long, and this was many years ago, but what happens, as I said before, is when you've got a fire in the fireplace, it's pulling air from the room, but it's also pulling air from the entire house. So if you're heating your home, there's oxygen throughout your home, and that that air is warm air in other locations. But it doesn't really matter. It's air. So it's being pulled from the room where you've got a fire going in your fireplace, and it's essentially pulling lots of warm air from the house because it's warmer than it is in the fireplace. Regardless, it's air anyway. Once that chimney is pulling air from, it's like a siphon. Mm-hmm. Once it's pulling air from the house, it's going to continue to do so once that fire is burning. So the rest of your house is getting cold because the fire is pulling air and it's using oxygen for combustion, and most of that hot air is going right up your flue. So two things that you can do to improve the efficiency of a wood-burning fire. Number one, we talked about that flue or the damper. So we've got the flue, and then there's a metal damper, and it's got a little flipper in there, and that you can crank it all the way open, or you can allow it to be partially open. And once your fire's going, you cannot close it, because once you close it, the smoke will come right out of the firebox and it'll end up in the room. You've got to open that up. The smoke will still be pulled through the damper and up through the flue, but that will release less of the hot air or the air that's being pulled through your house. And combustion's still going to happen, and it likely will not diminish the fire. So that's one way, so a partially closed flue. And the second is to get a glass barrier and put it in front of the fire. And combustion still happens with a glass barrier. Believe me, we have a glass barrier on our fireplace, and the house still loses air. You can kind of feel it. You pull those doors open, and there's a suction that's created by all the air that's being pulled through the cracks around the glass. But if you do put a glass barrier up in front of the fireplace, once you get that fire going, it's going to help the temperatures throughout the house not get quite as cold. So anyway, that's the downside to having these, to having a really good wood burning fireplace, is that many times it's going to make the rest of your house cold. Now, one of the ways to avoid that altogether is to get an enclosed gas firebox, right? So today you can buy these very beautiful glass gas-powered fireboxes, and they're enclosed. So there's glass in front of them, and they're drawing a little bit of air, but what's really happening in there is not pulling air through your house and running up a flue. My parents they have a relatively new home, and they did that, and the rest of the house stays quite warm while they burn that firebox, that enclosed firebox.
So after listening to your tips, Doug, I wonder, is a wood-burning fireplace, is that an efficient way to heat a home?
Not anymore. It really, I mean, from what I can tell, it isn't. When you get these enclosed gas units, they heat everything up around them. And as I said before, it's really about reflecting the heat back into the room. And that's what these things are doing. They're creating a lot of heat. And then if they're set in, say, a masonry wall, that's going to heat that space up very, very nicely. I don't think a wood-burning fireplace is a really efficient way to heat a home anymore. From what I read, most of the heat and all of the smoke is being pulled up through that flue. You're not doing a whole lot for heating your house except for heating up the masonry around it and then reflecting that heat back into the room with a wood-burning fireplace. So good point.
Interesting. Okay, so my third tip, it has to do with an area that I did not realize was a major source of heat loss, and that had to do with my recessed lights. Architects love using recessed lights. I've got them all above me and behind me, and these recessed lights, and I think they look great because you don't see anything and just the light. But when I installed these lights, I realized that the box was not an insulated box. It was just a kind of a metal housing, and I put the light up there. And because there's a lot of heat, you really can't be putting lots of bad insulation all around these things, right? So it has this housing, metal housing, and I thought, oh, it's closed up. I don't really see any heat going out there, out the out the out the light, but in fact, of course, heat rises and it's going right through my light fixtures. And I found it most when I recently unscrewed the light bulb and was changing the bulb, and I thought, oh my God, look at this cold air just kind of blowing. I could feel it, just my heat just sort of going out into my attic, and realized that the housing I had was not, and they call it ICAT, it's insulation contact airtight canister. So ICAT, it's a kind of grade of housing for a light that, of course, I would use going forward. But back when I designed this house, I did not get those. And so this is a housing which is insulated, it's airtight. The light, the light, it's not going to, because it's very hot up there, it's not going to create any kind of extra heat where there could be a fire issue, and will not let air or heat escape out the light fixture. So what are my options right now? I thought, sort of maybe stupidly, I thought that the light actually would have enough heat that somehow the heat would, I don't know, there would be a net, net zero, there'd be enough heat, but I'd be losing some or whatever. But no, it's not happening at all, because the heat from the light is really just going up and out as well. So the heat, it heats up, the light's hot, but it goes up and out. And now I have LED bulbs, so there's no heat at all. So it's just a complete loser. And I think my only option is to completely change the housing. And it's something I have to consider. It may be costly, but because I have to, it's not that housing that's just so expensive. It's drywall, it's cutting it back out, it's putting it back in, it's patching and painting. So it's a process, but it may be worth it. Of course, if I was building a new house, I would not have this problem again. But right now, I have these older leaky canister lights, and my only real option is to change the housing, because I can't really insulate around the housing, because that housing is not really made for, again, fire safety and all of that. It's not really meant for that. So I have to switch them out, I think, and it's something going forward I will not make. I don't know if it's a mistake exactly, but at the time, I don't think I was aware that this is going to be a big issue, and going forward, certainly will be aware.
So this is a question for you. So when I spec an IC housing, from what I understood, I'm speccing a light fixture with a box around it, and the box is keeping the insulation away from the light fixture for fire rating, right? So that it does not burn. But you're saying I can also get a housing that has or contains insulation in it as well?
Well, no, really, you spec an IC. That's you want AT, airtight.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, we need the airtight. So I think that's the key. Try to get it more airtight.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I look at this and I see these lights. I'm like, oh, those are just holes where all my heat is going out.
Oh my God, dude!
Right? It's the warm air is going up and it's just going out the window. And if that was like, I don't know, if I could visualize like coins, just going out those little lights. So
I see.
Kind of a bummer, but
boy, that is an amazing tip. I did not know that.
Yeah, and I got to go down and look at my fireplace now. I'm sort of thinking about some of my fireplace and how to get that to be more efficient based on what you told me. So it's good. It's good to hear your tips.
It's a good thing we talked today.
Okay. All right, Doug. So those are our 3 tips on how to keep the house warm. I'm not sure if hopefully someone found it useful. I know that I've got a tip from you that I'm going to go check out today, and you're going to look at your lights, I guess. Okay. So we had a question from a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to get to it. It doesn't have to do with this topic, but I really I was interested in what this person was asking, and see if we can help them out. Okay, so hello guys. I am a 35-year-old police officer in California. Police officer in California, Doug.
Right.
I'm going to school and will hopefully be applying to transfer to UC Berkeley, Environmental School of Design, for the fall of 2019, which is an awesome school. I listened to your video on tips as you and Doug gave good insight for the comparisons of schools and programs and the kinds of schools that are available to students. My question is more specific to me. I plan on going to Berkeley. What is the difference from a non-professional BA in architecture and a professional master's in architecture? So that's the first question, is what is the difference between non-professional and professional? So that's I know the answer to that one. The second is the state of California requires a total of 5 years under licensed architect to be eligible for examination. So we can talk about that. So Doug, any thoughts about our friends' questions here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get asked the same thing a lot. It really depends on what your aspirations are. So if you want to call yourself an architect legally in all 50 states in the U.S., you must have a professional license. You have to have passed the licensing exam. Now, in order to get your license, you have to have gone to an NAAB accredited college, university, and gone through their program. And so he's mentioning master's program. Some schools have gone to a 5-year master's program. Some schools still, I believe, still do a Bachelor of Architecture after 5 years. Mm-hmm. And some schools offer a 4-year non-accredited degree. If you go those 4 years, you get out of school, you are not eligible to take your licensing exam and call yourself an architect. And at the end of the day, what do you want to be? What do you want to do with the rest of your life? Do you want to become an architect, call yourself an architect, maybe have your own firm someday? I am an architect. I can put that word legally behind my name. Then you want to go to an NAAB accredited university, get an accredited degree, and eventually take your licensing exam. You can take your exam if you have that 5-year MArch. You can take the exam. If you go, I went 4 years, got a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, and then had to go an additional year. I got a Bachelor of Architecture degree. That's what they offered back then. So I've been in school 5 years. I can take my licensing exam only after I fulfill the requirements of my state. And so Pennsylvania was NCARB, so you had to join the NCARB and go through 3 to 5 years of internship and mark all that stuff off, and then you take your test. So I would recommend to him, he's pretty far along in his career, but it sounds like he'd really like to be an architect someday, call himself an architect. It's going to be time consuming, but I would go to an accredited school and get that name behind you so that you can take that licensing exam. I think that's important. He's old enough to know what he really wants. It seemed to me that would be the right thing to do.
Okay, so the key here is professional versus non-professional, and you have to get a professional degree. I mean, the 4-year program is like a Bachelor of Arts almost in architecture, where you're doing some coursework which is architecture related and architecture focused, but when you're done, that's not a professional degree. You need a professional degree. That can be a 5-year program, what you mentioned, and I've done the same thing. Yep. After 5 years of school, I had a professional degree in architecture. Or you can do a master's degree, and then master's will also give you a professional degree. So I assume that this person has a college degree. If he does, I would go for the master's.
Right.
If he doesn't, he's going to have to do the 4 years. Let's say it's Berkeley, it's 4 years, and he's going to have to stay on, get the master's, or maybe go to another school. But basically, you need that professional degree program. And then let's say this is the traditional route. So you have a professional degree. Then you have to go work for an architect for minimum, I think it's 3 years, right?
Right.
And only then can you sit
it's
for
a little
exam.
lighter now, but
it's a little lighter. Okay, so but basically it's a process, as we like talking about process. But you need that professional degree program. And I know I have a lot of friends that went to schools just exactly like Berkeley, to Berkeley, and they, after they were finished at Berkeley, they had to come do 4 years of a master's program to get a professional degree. So they did 4 years of Berkeley undergrad, fantastic school, but that's not a professional degree program. They had to then go on and get a master's degree to get their licensing, to be able to sit for the license. If you have time, that's fantastic. You can take your time. If you want to move along, then really maybe the best case is to do the master's. Maybe they have a 4 years undergrad, 1 more year for a master's. I'm not sure what exactly now it is at Berkeley, but you have to get that professional degree program. So that's the key. It's professional. You need that.
Yeah. It should be noted, there are many students that do go those 4 years undergrad in a Bachelor of Science in anything, philosophy, and then you go 3 years. Like at Penn at the time, it was 3-year master program, and you can become an architect. I always thought it was kind of goofy. I went to school for 5 years in architecture, did studio for 5 years, and yet somebody can go 4 years in a completely unrelated major and then go 3 years in a master program and become a licensed architect. I mean, I guess it's because, or by virtue of the fact you've been in school for so long, you know, it's eventually it's time to get out. But that's the way it works.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, these people that do the 4 years undergrad, they do some studio work, and then they really go on for another 3.5 years. I think a Berkeley undergrad, because the school it's a well-regarded program, they have a lot of intensive design work. You can do often 4 years undergrad process, but I'm not sure where he is in all of his other studies and what kind of credits he has, but that's also possible. But I find more and more these days people are trying to get out and go faster. And there are schools that have a 4-year undergrad program, and stay 1 more year, you get the master's degree. That seems to be a good bet if you want to kind of get out. If you've got a lot of time and also money, you can stay longer and get the kind of more you know, intensive and longer stay in school. Which when we were in school, I guess we had a little bit more time, but it seems that these days, given the cost, it's difficult to kind of stay. And while architecture school can be really fun in the sense you're doing all these projects and it's really kind of fun, and it's so expensive that maybe you need to move along. I mean, that's what I'm finding.
Yeah. Get kids, get them in now.
All right, Doug. So that was our first post-Christmas 2018 podcast. Any final thoughts on staying warm, keeping warm? You got a cough button there, Doug? Do you have a cough button?
I got a mute. I got a mute button.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
Nice.
So let me take us out because we have done quite a show today. So you've been watching or listening to Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you say hello, shoot us an email, or ask us a question. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next time.